Good evening, Chicago. Welcome to a monthly program of the Ethiopian Community Association of Chicago. The Ethiopian Community Association of Chicago is located in the north side. It provides refugee resettlement and a number of other services for immigrants and refugees. For contact information, that is the Ethiopian Community Association of Chicago, located at 1730 West Greenleaf. The telephone number is 773-508-0303. Our website is www.ecachicago.org. Today we have a very important and critical issue that we want to discuss or share the information with you. Recently there is a human trafficking issue that is affecting the international community. To discuss that issue, we will have Nehal Gill, who is legal director of the Apnagar organization. Before we go to the discussion, why did we choose this topic? Particularly in East Africa, it has become rampant that many people are being smuggled and abused by smugglers. That problem is really frequently occurring, and it is affecting a lot of people. Neha will highlight all the problems that are coming along that night. Thank you, Neha, for coming and share your experiences and your information with all of us.
Thank you very much for having me. I also had the honor last year of speaking at the Ethiopian Community Association of Chicago's annual dinner on this topic, so I'm very happy to be on the show with you again to talk about trafficking, and trafficking especially, for example, from the Horn of Africa in that area.
Mm-hmm. First, I would like to ask you if you can tell us about Apnagar, its mission, and the kind of services it provides to people.
Apnagar is an organization that started in 1990 to serve the South Asian community specifically, and within that specifically women and girls, and as well as children that were experiencing domestic violence. But as the community grew, we've also started serving many other immigrant communities, and we've also sort of expanded our understanding of what violence against women can actually comprise of. So there can be a lot of different things, which is how we also started dealing with the issue of trafficking. So Apnagar in its mission is still the same, but sort of broadening its understanding and its capacity. Our services include a 24-hour emergency shelter, transitional housing apartments. We now have about 7 apartments. We also provide counseling, legal advocacy services. Additionally, we also have a visitation center. So we have several services in several areas within which we're working. We are based out of the Uptown area, but we service communities all over Chicago, all over the Midwest. We're also working to some extent internationally, helping people coordinate services sometimes when they are in their home countries and things like that.
Thank you. I know some of our community members have benefited from the wonderful services you provide. Thank you for that. Well, the scope of human trafficking is really rising, and it is affecting every society, particularly in East Africa. The problem is really aggravated from day to day. This year alone, there has been 30,000 Ethiopians smuggled into Yemen. And when they arrive in Yemen, Somalis, Eritreans, and other groups, they are transferred to other smugglers, and those smugglers ask for money from their relatives somewhere in America or Europe. They are asking for ransom. That kind of problem is really rampant, and it is affecting many societies, many people. Can you highlight, the scope of the international problem, the global problem of
Sure.
human trafficking?
Actually, the United Nations globally, they estimate that about 2 million people are trafficked every year. About 80% of that 2 million are women and girls. However, it is an issue that affects men and boys as well, because people are trafficked into various situations related primarily to labor or sex trafficking. And within labor trafficking, there can be just so many different things that they are trafficked into, and that their labor is exploited. So it is definitely a large global problem. And specifically, for example, with Ethiopia tends to be a source country, which means that many people are recruited right out of Ethiopia for the purpose of being trafficked. It's unfortunately a very lucrative business, so that a trafficker could make up to $800 for each person that they traffic. And so, just as you said, many people from the countries that you've mentioned, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, are trafficked into the Middle East, into, like you said, again, Yemen and Lebanon. Lebanon especially, it's a large problem there. There are some estimates that monthly about 1,000 Ethiopian women specifically are sent to Beirut. So it's definitely a problem that people in those countries are facing. But I do want to say that, like I started out saying, that it's a global problem. Cases of trafficking have been identified in every single state in the United States. Trafficking obviously can take on an international dimension, with people traveling across countries, being recruited in one place, transiting through other places, and then ending up in a third country. But there's also issues of domestic trafficking, so following similar patterns, but sort of within the same country. So it's a large scale problem with many different dimensions.
Thank you. There has been reports, some forms of human trafficking. I think, as I said, earlier, it is asking ransom, a huge amount of money. It has been reported that some family members of the trafficked person have been asked $30,000. That's a lot of money, actually.
Yeah.
And if they don't pay, if they resist, they are abused, beaten, sometimes even killings are involved. Can you just highlight some of the some of the human trafficking methods and abuses that are taking place?
Sure. I think that at the heart of the issue of trafficking is this sort of enslavement and exploitation that someone who's trafficked experiences. But before that, there is a lot of fraud and coercion, and just all of the things that you're talking about, serious abuse and danger that they're in when they are being trafficked from the beginning stage. So, and typically that would be when these issues around ransom, paying additional costs, so that they may talk to, they may be aware to some extent of the trafficker, or somebody in their family might be, and they might have, for example, worked on a certain amount, or they may have talked about those things, but it typically ends up where they always have to pay more, and that's either through force, as in these ransom situations, or through sort of starting to exploit them earlier on, so that they might have discussed a destination country, for example, in the West, in Europe or the United States, but they might find themselves abandoned or being forced to perform labor or even sex in midpoint countries, and that's a lot of times where Sudan, Yemen, and a lot of Middle Eastern countries, for people from the Horn of Africa, that's where that comes into play, because they're transiting through those countries. But that's a very typical pattern in terms of the coercion and the abuse that somebody who's trafficked faces. They, in addition to going through that trauma and that difficulty of experiencing being trafficked, they're also have to pay a lot of money, and they also find themselves indebted in many different ways to the traffickers.
Good. Listeners, if you have some questions, you can call at 312-738-1060. I know for sure, some people go legally. There are some agents that transport, that make arrangements for people to work in certain countries. And the bulk of the population goes, illegally through the arrangement of smugglers. Those who go legally, the report is said that their passport is taken, and they have nowhere to go. It is just a slavery, modern day slavery, the kind of abuses that they go through. With such kind of abuses and huge problems facing many people, what is the international community doing, or governments are doing regarding that?
The UN, and actually before I get into some of the solutions and what the international community is doing, I did want to point out that that's actually very true what you said in terms of the people that we've provided services to. So I wanted to highlight some of those cases that a lot of people actually do end up getting trafficked. We do think about trafficking on a large scale. We think about organized crime. We think about these issues around smuggling. But a lot of times, like you said, someone might have traveled legally, for example, for the purposes of working in someone's home or working in someone's business. But then they find that, in fact, they were, misled, and that they find themselves in a situation where they're being exploited and enslaved, just like you said, and the passports and things are being held. So that's actually quite a large component of what we end up seeing here in Chicago. So I just kind of wanted to say that. The U.S. has the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. The UN has a couple of conventions and also some guidance for international communities and international for countries. I know that many countries are adopting locally adopting laws. Ethiopia created some laws around trafficking in 2010, both for the purposes of international trafficking, but also understanding domestic trafficking, so people experiencing a lot of the same things, but maybe from rural areas being brought into the cities and things like that. So there's certainly an international awareness of this issue and some level of response from different countries. I know that under Hillary Clinton, for example, the State Department took this issue very seriously and identified countries that identified the issues, identified the responses that each country has, and kind of provided guidance around those things. So there's certainly a legal framework for this issue. Implementation, understanding, all of those things sometimes take time and work differently in different countries, but the framework definitely does exist.
Listeners, if you have some questions, please call 312-738-1060. What can the Ethiopian diaspora do to stop this kind of human rights abuses and Can you suggest some?
Sure.
Some
I
action
think,
plans?
I think that there's, I think that all communities can start by becoming more aware of the issue. I know that, for example, CNN has started the Freedom Project to highlight specifically the issue of trafficking. So I think that all community members should generally increase their awareness and understanding of the issue. And then, there are many push and pull factors around economics, but I think that as community members, we should also be vigilant. And, if we come across these issues, obviously we shouldn't engage in them, but if we come across these issues, that we should know that there are people that we could report to. For example, in Chicago, the FBI is very aware, but also just a simple referral to an agency like the Ethiopian Community Association of Chicago or Apnagar, I think could help in terms of, helping people who might find themselves in this situation. Some of the people that I've worked with in terms of helping them find the resources and the remedies available to them, people who have been trafficked, were helped by community members. So, for example, we worked with someone who was trafficked into Chicago, and she was very new to the area, and she just approached an Ethiopian a cab driver, I believe, and he was very helpful and referred her to the right places. And so sometimes it's just about being aware ourselves and being aware of the resources that are available. So I think those things can be helpful as a starting point. But then, of course, communities can come together, can try to mobilize, can put pressure on governments, and there's just many ways in which communities can engage in being helpful towards eradicating this problem.
If cases of human trafficking is reported to you, how do you make sure that it is really a case of human trafficking?
So there's several things that happen in terms of kind of a legal remedy, but in terms of because Apnagar is also a social service organization, and we want to be able to provide assistance to people. Sometimes it may not be legally a trafficking case. For example, we have had cases where people have gone to Ethiopia or to different countries from the U.S. for the purposes of getting married, right? But then they'll bring the person back and they'll actually exploit them and be sexually and, abusive or very exploitative in different ways. That may be understood legally as a trafficking issue or not, right? So sometimes the remedy could be something different, but we could provide, Apnagar can provide service, we can provide housing, we can provide counseling and all of those things, and some cases meet the level of a kind of a legal case for trafficking and some don't, but in terms of being able to kind of provide services, we exist to do that, and so that's what we would do. And in other cases, we would also make a referral to whomever the appropriate agency would be to, for example, for the legal issues if needed, or any other counseling, case management, or social service oriented issues.
Okay, hello. We have a caller. Can you ask your question, please?
Yeah. Talking about this whole issue of trafficking, in order to address the issue, there has to be laws in the countries of origin where these individuals will be punished to set examples for potential perpetrators of this crime. Have there been documented cases where these individuals are actually returned back to the country of origin so they face prosecution, so that they set example for others who may be trying to do the same thing?
I'm not not aware of a case of that nature exactly, in terms of a trafficker being deported or returned to their home country and then being tried again or made an example of in the way that you're talking about, which, certainly could prove to be valuable. But certainly, like, people based on their immigration status and things like that often do face being deported after they've been committed of a crime in the U.S. And so that has happened. But in terms of, again, being retried or having another case in the country that they return to, I'm not sure how that would work.
Very good. Callers, if you have questions, again, 312-738-1060. I ask that question, the credibility of the report, because we receive many reports. People go from here, get married, and they bring their wives or fiancé here. And in some cases, that is very true. But the spouse complain of human trafficking, and sometimes it's very difficult for us to determine and refer the case to you for services. In the past we have done that so many times, but increasingly some questions of similar nature are coming, but sometimes doubtful requests or assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, within that sort of context of the marriage, it could be difficult, just even legally, to talk about, trafficking. However, because Apnagar is set up to serve, people who are experiencing any form of violence, women and girls especially, that, you could still maybe refer, and then we could see if it's kind of a domestic violence situation as opposed to trafficking, or, that there's something else that might be available for, the victim.
I know you provide also domestic abuse services. What kind of domestic abuse services are you receiving, and how do you go about it?
So at Apnagar, the services include a 24-hour crisis line. So anyone who's experiencing violence or abuse may call that hotline and expect to, be to talk to someone about the services that are available, or to talk about their problems. That number is 800-717-0757. And beyond that, we also provide services through our housing services, through our emergency shelter or our transitional housing programs. We also have services for people who are in their own homes or in living independently through our legal advocacy program or our counseling program. We also provide services to families through the visitation center. So there's many services that we provide within the agency, but we could also provide referrals. So for example, in the cases that we've talked about with people from the Ethiopian community, we're able to engage with ECAC to provide, linguistic or cultural expertise, and that we could provide some of the services around the actual violence that the person is experiencing. So, and we refer for other, sort of things around employment, public aid benefits, all of those things as well. So we collaborate with different agencies to provide those services.
Thank you. To contact the Ethiopian Community Association of Chicago, it is located on 1730 West Greenleaf Avenue. The telephone number is 773-508-0303, and the website is www.ecachicago.org. On June 8th, the Ethiopian Community Association will have its annual dinner, benefit dinner. Listeners, if you are interested, please join us. It's going to be at the German Cultural Center, 4740 North Western Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Neha. I appreciate
Thank you very much for
sharing
having
with us.
me.
Thank you.